morning, everybody. That's everyone in this hall and those of you who may be watching in Cinema 3 nearby. And welcome to the opening session of CMC 2019. That's the one where we tried to get through a lot of big issues, responding to your questions, and to cover those points as fast as we can, remembering that some of them will be followed up in detail in the sessions in the next few days. Now, our opening question time session draws on this conference theme of limiting the limitless. Children have got limitless curiosity, imagination, and appetite for entertainment and learning. How can the kids' media industry creatively support that while making sense of their near limitless choice and connectivity and your near limitless ambition? Now, the questions, thank you to those delegates who sent them in. We have allocated you a number, and I will call the number. There will then be something of a guessing game where we try and find you in the audience with the microphones. Please wait for the microphone, then identify yourself, ask your question. And I won't necessarily ask all of our contributors to comment on every point, but I'll certainly try and make sure those who are most relevant get the chance to respond. And your guests today are Kevin Backhurst, who's the Group Director for Content and Media Policy at Ofcom, Anne Brogan, who's the Joint Managing Director of Kindle Entertainment Limited, and also a board member of the Children's Media Foundation. Magnus Brook is Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at ITV. Sitting in chair number 4 appropriately is Sophie Jones, Head of Corporate Relations at Channel 4. John McVeigh, OBE, is the Chief Executive at PACT, and Alice Webb is the Director of BBC Children's and Education. And as usual, Children's Media Foundation rules apply. That means no biting, no gouging, and please keep it short. Small declaration of interest. I am a non-executive director of Channel 4, but I haven't been involved in the detailed discussions on their initiative, which will be announced today. So that's got us going. Question number 1. Well done, the microphone. Yeah. Thank you for making yourself known to us.
Hello, everyone. I'm Richard Bradley. I'm from Lion TV, and I'm co-chair of the Children's TV Council. My question, is Ofcom happy that the commercial PSBs have done enough to fill the significant gaps it identified in the Children's Review last year? How and when will Ofcom know if its creative approach has worked? And if it hasn't, will Ofcom regulate?
Thank you, Richard. To explain to those who may not have followed all the detail of this, Baroness Fluella Benjamin, with a little bit of advice from John McVeigh here, got an amendment through in the Digital Economy Act, which gave Ofcom new responsibilities for looking into this area. Ofcom did a review. They then asked the commercial PSBs, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, to respond. They have responded. I think their responses were public already, but now as of 9 o'clock this morning, we have the response from Ofcom to what they make of those new announcements. Kevin, to Richard's question, have they done enough to fill the significant gaps?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say I think all the PSBs have responded in a really positive way with some amazing new ideas. I think the fundamental approach Ofcom took on this is, most of our powers are in regulating the linear parts of what PSBs do. But we, as part of this project, looked at what are the behaviours which everyone in this room knows very well about young audiences, which are increasingly watching content and reading content in different ways. So we felt, rather than try and use sort of relatively backward-looking, old-fashioned regulatory tools for the PSBs, what we wanted to do actually was to give them a challenge to say, what can you do across the piece, across your services? And they've come back in a very imaginative way. And for those people who haven't seen it, it involves, first of all, it involves extra spending on content from all of them. But it also involves new types of content in different areas, which they can talk about themselves, but online, YouTube channels, and so on. So we're very encouraged by what they've said they're going to do. How are we going to monitor it? We are going to monitor it going forward. See what they deliver, see what the impact is. As you'll know, we do a lot of work in terms of every year looking at, first of all, the amount of spend on children's content in the UK. Secondly, how young people and children are consuming that content. And thirdly, what are the PSBs and the BBC separately as part of that spending on young people's and children's content. So we try and take the overall picture, but we also try and take a view on the health of the PSBs generally. And one of the things that one of the reasons I say I think the response was impressive is because there is no doubt the commercial PSBs are in a particularly difficult environment at the moment. They're under relatively considerable pressure financially. The advertising market is not brilliant. Huge competition, as we know, from new entrants into the market. So this is in the context of what the PSBs are being asked to do across the piece, which isn't just children's, it's also news and other responsibilities, and taking into account the overall health of PSBs and commercial broadcasting too.
So, Kevin, I take it from that Ofcom does not feel there are any significant, or the gaps are significant enough for you to take further action at this point. Though, of course, in the paper you do reserve the right to come back to this when you look at the PSB review overall, and as you say, ultimately part of the next PSB relicensing process. So in a sense, there is the potential there for you to come back and say, as it turned out, it's not enough. Is that right?
Yeah, there's always a backstop where we can, regulate. I mean, the PSBs have, as we know, a level of responsibility already, a level of commitments that they've made. Either it's in their licenses or they've made public commitments to a certain level of content. It's always open to us to step in if we feel they're falling below that. So we could return to it. I mean, it's worth saying, as I touched on, there is, I think, a question mark over what public service broadcasting is going to look like in the next 10 or 20 years in this country, and that is going to be something that we hope to start a wider conversation on, if you like, in terms of what are the responsibilities they have, and in particular which genres are really important to audiences and which ones we should be safeguarding and how they're going to be paid for going forward.
Magnus from ITV, as part of this review, you announced, or ITV announced, increasing the budget of CITV by almost 10% in 2019. It's going to mean more original high-quality programmes for 6 to 12-year-olds. It's going to be available on the ITV Hub, and you're also going to develop a new online news and current affairs offering for 12 to 15-year-olds. I mean, connoisseurs of ITV's position on this may remember a slightly different tone in previous years, which was, things are so bad, there's nothing much we can do. Has the arrival of a new chief executive at ITV, or indeed the nudge from the regulator, meant that you've been able to be more creative in this area?
I think certainly the conversation with Ofcom was certainly part of it. Kids is a really challenging genre for ITV, as Kevin said, and we haven't had PSB obligations, formal PSB obligations for some time. We, of course, had to have a conversation following the parliamentary debate with Ofcom and talk ourselves about how we were going to up our game. And I think the one thing you missed out there, by the way, was the contestable fund, because I think
we're going to come on to the contestable fund in a second.
Well, but I think just take the online news service. I think that one of the conversations we had internally was actually taking a 5 to 10 year view. How are we going to deliver news over that period? And I think one thing that's very clear is that we're going to be moving to a hybrid delivery, I think, of news increasingly, because you've got a linear channel where we still have very popular news programs, but equally there are a lot of people now consuming news online, and we already have a very significant presence on YouTube, Instagram, and elsewhere for our news services. But it makes a certain amount of sense if we're trying to reach children to have an online news offering. So that seemed like a sensible thing to do in the context of the challenge from the regulator, and it fits more broadly, I think, with some of our thinking about the future of news on ITV more generally. But what it does do is as Kevin said, it really does shine a light on the need to modernise the PSB regime, because increasingly we're...
By that you mean that we can do things online rather than on television?
Well, I think it's a mixture. It's a mixture of...
and sometimes maybe even instead of doing it on television.
Well, yeah. I mean, because we are going to be increasingly in a hybrid world in which we have older audiences continuing to consume a really very significant amount of linear content, PSB content on the main channel, and that's terrific. But equally, we're going to have younger audiences, children, 16-34s, who are consuming content, yes, definitely live on the main channel, and that will continue to be very important to bring the whole nation together, but also consuming lots of content on demand. And so it would be a bit weird if we had another PSB settlement from 2024, which was entirely focused on the linear channel. That would be a bit odd. But at the same time, as Kevin also suggested, we need to think about how we're going to pay for it, because this is getting really, the advertising finance television is getting tougher. We've got significant headwinds, Google, Facebook, massive competition, all of which is now targeted on TV advertising. All the other media have gone.
Okay.
The last bit left is
we'll
TV.
have a chance to come back to that later if I could, but thank you for that. Sophie, on this theme of television and online, the Channel 4 announcement, develop a new digital-first service for 13 to 16-year-olds, will focus on a new YouTube channel and include new commissions, especially for teenagers. What I noticed, compared to the ITV announcement, and indeed the Channel 5, should say that Channel 5 is covered by this, they're not actually in this panel, was they put some sort of budget figures on it. I think there's been a story in broadcast that said this is £1 million plus, I think. Is that per year or over a term or what?
We've said it's a seven-figure annual investment in short and mid-form content on a brand new YouTube, but flex to other platform channels. So it's new money into new content.
Right.
But I think the interesting thing about this process, and I would say the level of enthusiasm and joined upness across Channel 4 to develop the idea and really kind of come together in a really excited way about what we can deliver is actually, we were able to kind of come at the question thinking really openly about what was the best thing in terms of trying to fill the gap. And, I think your question is right. It's about trying to sort of identify what the gap is and where we can add real additional value. And our assessment of that is that teen audience is particularly underserved, and that teen audience is moving faster and faster than the other part of the audience away from linear television, and yet still has a massive thirst for high quality public service value content. So that's the spot we're trying to hit, is to bring the kind of best of the values of Channel 4 with content that is challenging and topical and funny and cheeky and mischievous and all those things that I hope you would associate with Channel 4, and take it to where the audience is spending more and more of their time. And I think it's been a positive process in enabling us to think more creatively and more flexibly about how we can serve the audience need in more sort of innovative ways than coming at it in a kind of how do we fill this question in a linear schedule on telly.
Okay, John, as I say, you were involved in this initiative from the start. I mean, how do you answer Richard's question, which I'll rephrase, is packed content that the commercial PSBs have done enough to fill significant gaps?
Well, I think we'll sort of wait and see what Ofcom think in the longer term. But I've got to welcome what the broadcasters have done. I think they've brought a different, their own brand values, their own sense of innovation, their own sense of who their audiences are. And I think that's good. I mean, what we wanted to see was opportunity for all the people in this room to make more brilliant stuff for British kids. Now, what that is, how they watch it, is a challenge, but an opportunity. And I think more investment into drama, into news, factual programming, those were the deficits that we saw across the sector. And I think that we are looking forward optimistically to the opportunities this is going to bring. So, but what Kevin said and Magnus, I do remember Ed Richards at the beginning of his tenure saying, well, we're going to have a big debate of what PSB is in the next 10 to 20 years. This is an ongoing dialogue, and it's a healthy dialogue to try and adapt to, we've always been adapting to the world and the challenges, and I think the creative community in this room and the creative broadcasters on the panel here, that's what we do. And I tend to sort of not get so worried because we've navigated for the past decade some of the most disruptive changes in our industry. It's not to say that there won't be more disruption, but I think if you make great stuff and you get it to the audiences, then I think we will do fine.
But I suppose, I think Kevin will correct me if I'm wrong, this is a significant moment where Ofcom is saying PSB responsibilities can be discharged online. I'm not sure that's ever been said in another genre, but I may be wrong. Well,
just to my Ed Richards point, Ed Richards came up with a thing called the Public Service Publishers 10 years ago,
yes,
which was an online...
But it never happened. This one's happened.
It's not the first time Ofcom have thought like that.
No, absolutely. But it's actually the first time they've actually...
I welcome it. I think
absolutely. Anne, sorry, do you want to come in from CMF to a certain extent?
To answer Richard's question directly and briefly, his question, are the commercial PSBs doing enough? It's simply too early to say. All the commercial PSBs are saying the right things, and I agree with the rest of the panel that the responses have been very imaginative. However, those responses have to be delivered, and you can't do that without money. Everyone in this room knows you cannot make great content without it being financed. And that's what, in a year's time, I think we should be able to much better assess.
Okay. Thanks very much. Shall we move on then to question 2?
Hi, I'm Deborah Thorpe, CEO of Calabac Media. My question is, now that the Young Audience Content Fund is up and running, how do the PSBs, including the BBC, see their relationship with the fund? Will they be putting up money? And how does the panel see the financing of the fund beyond the pilot?
Thanks, Deborah. This is the fund of up to 60 million. 3 million has been moved over to radio, so we're talking about 57 million over 3 years. And the fund will expects that the people bringing proposals to it to have got broadcaster approval, and they will go up to 50% of the budget. Magnus, I think Paul Mortimer of ITV Kids has actually put out a wish list for what he wants, what he would like to come from out of this process. What's happened so far?
Well, we've got, I think, at least one proposal in a very advanced stage with the fund, and what we've done is put out a proposal or a set of requirements in relation to a number of different live action genres, where we're looking for proposals from producers. And about half the budget of CITV goes on original commissions. We've increased the budget specifically, actually, with the idea of using that as sort of match funding for the fund. So we're very actively engaging with the fund. We're talking to them all the time. We're talking to producers who are talking to the fund. So I think we're about as involved, and Paul is about as involved as he can be, because it's a fantastic opportunity. We want CITV to be as good as it can be. In fact, we want it to be better than it is at the moment. And it's the obvious thing to do, to be very closely engaged and to work with producers and to try and work out how we leverage the maximum amount of money out of the fund to make as much great British content for CITV as we can. So we're very positive about it.
Sophie, Channel 4, have you got anything in, or somebody got it in as a result of a discussion with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think similarly, we have started having some really interesting conversations with the people running the fund, with producers. So there we're probably not quite as sort of advanced into specific projects, but there are lots of discussions going on, and that's cross-genre. So commissioning editors right across all the genres are, open to ideas, and some really interesting live conversations going on. So likewise, we're feeling very positive in that it's actually opening up possibilities for content that wouldn't otherwise be pursued as far as it might be, because the fund is there and it's kind of enabling some projects to get further than they might otherwise have done. So
okay, so just to confirm, things you talked about in the first question, they're not conditional on funding.
So our team's proposition is not conditional.
Right,
on
and Magnus, is your
at all.
10% conditional on the fund providing some of it or not?
No, the 10% is just an ITV budget increase of CITV.
Okay, fine. Alice, the whole idea of this fund, one of the ideas we found fund, was that the BBC is not involved, because the BBC seem to have a very strong position in this. So can we, for clarification, there's no other part of the BBC which somehow, somewhere is putting in a proposal, is there, or is there?
No, so first of all, thank you for the question. Just want to say, first of all, we really, really welcome today's announcements, announcements that have come from other commercial PSBs about children's investment in children's content. We've always said that we think there is more for everybody to do in this area. We think it's really important, so we really welcome that. I think when it comes to the Young Audiences Fund, you've already said it, Stuart, in terms of that fund was primarily there to support more people in the industry, more broadcasters commissioning on whatever platform. And we think that that's really important. With the additions that my other colleagues here have talked about, BBC will still be overwhelmingly the largest investor in children's content. We think it's really important the fund is allowed to do what it was there to do. It's really early days for the fund. So currently the BBC doesn't have plans to access that fund. That may change in the future, but right now we think it's really important the fund is allowed to do what it was there to do.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you on BBC funding in a second, but I'll give Anne and then John on, what do you think? What do you make of the progress so far? Are you happy with the way it's going?
I'm really happy with the enthusiasm. I think there's a real will to create new content that will be really fresh, really innovative, work for UK kids. Bear in mind that there's about 18 million a year over the next 3 years to invest in programming. That 18 million has to be match funded by a combination of the broadcasters and other sources of finance. That is going to be quite challenging, but it's obviously a challenge that all of us want to engage with.
John, what happens when the 3 years is up? Because this money comes from a specific allocation. No one knows whether there will be another allocation, do they?
No, I mean, we worked hard on the initial allocation, which originally it wasn't a kids fund, it was a generic PSB, anything fund, and we worked hard to get it turned into a kids fund, basically because of the legislation coming through to give incentives for the commercial broadcasters to invest and try and close the deficit finance for producers. So we're delighted about that. In the longer term, who knows? I mean, this money originally came from the BBC, and the big challenge will be, would the money come from the BBC at the end of the 3 years? Because if it doesn't come from the BBC again, and I'm not advocating that, and then central government will have to look at that. And then what world are we in talking about central government finance at this point in the cycle? So the key thing...
Which central government?
Which central, exactly, and what money and where? We've got, right now, get the money out the door, get the projects, and the great thing about this fund is it's effectively producers' equity. It's not got a position, it doesn't recoup, it doesn't have any of those incentives. It's basically grant money that must be spent on kids' content, and I think that's a great opportunity for 3 years. So, my position has been to encourage producers and broadcasters to work together and spend the money.
So, Alice, given that you're not getting any of this money, given that the BBC has made its announcement about what it's going to do about the over 75 licence fee burden or opportunity that it has, what impact, if any, would you expect the reduction in the BBC budget is going to have on children?
So I think none. None. The BBC made its position really clear about children's a couple of years ago. It invested. So despite the fact that we're taking on the burden of the over 75s from the government and let's be clear, it's the government that closed that concession, not the BBC, and that will cost us £250 million. The BBC is investing more in children's content. We are spending more on children's content than we ever have done. And that's our position and that's how it will stay. But I think it's really important to say that the money for the fund did come from the BBC. It was top slice from the licence fee. And any thought or talk of that for the future, then I would potentially be giving you a different answer sat here on the stage in the future. So I think this is really important that we as an industry, overall there needs to be more money into the industry, not robbing each other to try and make the money go around. We need more into the children's sector.
Okay, let's move on to question 3, please. Just down here at the front.
Hi, I'm Becky Overton, freelance writer. My question is, in this brave new Limitless world, are the SVODs to be welcomed or feared?
Thank you, Becky. Now, I don't know if many of you saw the primary debate in the States the other night, well, 2 of them, where there were 10 people on the stage on each time, and they were asked occasionally a snap question to which they had to put their hands up. Some of them put their hands up and then afterwards said they misunderstood the question. So let's ask, hands up, all those who believe that the SVODs, the streamers, should be welcomed. Who believes they should be feared? Okay. Magnus, you didn't put your hand up for fear, but only a minute ago you were telling me how about they were about to disrupt your business.
Well, I think okay. I think there are a couple of things here. I mean, so let's distinguish between the SVODs and Facebook, Google. So advertising financed online platforms. I think they're very different. That's the first thing to say. The second thing I'd say is, look, the SVODs are, what are they? Frenemies, I suppose, to some extent. I mean, it's great for audience choice. It's actually really good for the creative industries in the UK. ITV is a significant content supplier to Netflix and Amazon. So there's an opportunity for us. Yes, there's increasing competition for eyeballs, for people's attention. But, you know, in a sense, we can't be frightened of competition. We've got to get out there and meet the competition and do what we do best, which is make great content for UK audiences available for free universally across a whole range of genres. I mean, what the SVODs are not going to do, and they're very frank about it, they're going to stick to a pretty narrow set of genres compared to those that the PSBs are doing. It's always going to be a paid-for service, probably. So it's a different animal to PSB. I think where you need to worry is in relation to what you're going to see, I think, which are global deals between SVOD players and global TV platforms and operating systems, Android, Amazon, Samsung, and so on, edging out PSB from the frame of view in terms of how people access content, how they choose it, how it's presented to them, because you're going from a national market effectively to a global market at every level of the production chain, and the risk for national players is that actually you can't find the content. You can't easily find it and access it because a whole load of global deals have been done, which make it very difficult to find national PSB, which is not, by the way, an issue just for the UK. It's an issue which every single member state in Europe is kind of scratching its head about and saying, how do we preserve a vibrant national system of broadcasting which speaks very directly to everybody in the country, mostly for free, and so everybody can participate in national life, have the highest quality of content available to them, whilst at the same time not losing the benefits of the enormous investment that some West Coast investors are prepared to put into Netflix for the benefit of audiences in the UK. And I think you can have both, but you need to have you need to work out how you're going to structure that rather than just leave it to the market.
Right. And from the producer's point of view, are there any downsides to this sudden, exciting thirst for content?
Well, I think I prefer to talk about the upsides than the downsides.
I know you do, but I want to give you the opportunity to say whether there's a downside, because Magnus has given us, a wider context in which we might have cause for concern. But have producers got any concerns?
I guess because the upsides so outweigh the downsides, and I think the point I would really like to make that's actually different to the point that Magnus made is that I think in the area of teen in particular, but kids also, the really exciting thing that the SVODs have done is that their content isn't limited and isn't only specific genres. The SVODs, for example, were the first to really create exciting, compelling content that younger teens and older teens wanted to watch. And at CMC 3-4 years ago, we had several sessions on the lack of content made specifically for teens. And that landscape has been completely changed by the SVODs.
But I think that gets us to what we were sort of touching on earlier about this is a fundamental question when it comes to how we think about the future of PSB. And we also know that what we uniquely as PSBs do in terms of providing British relevant content for British audiences is hugely prized. And the stats show that it's not just prized by older, more familiar members of the audience, but it's valued by teens. And there's some really interesting stuff about levels of trust in PSB content and recognition of that by younger audiences. So it gets us right into the heart of that question we were touching on about how you make the PSB system fit for purpose and relevant and findable for audiences, because we still provide something that is different. And we always will, because our incentives to provide public value content is completely different to Netflix or indeed Facebook and Google and the incentives that they're working to. So that is at the heart of this debate, I think, and being able to think more creatively about how we deliver that in ways that suit the audience and how the regulations that sit around that enable audiences to find us. And I think Ofcom's publishing soon on prominence, but that's something we've been talking about a lot in terms of modernising that framework so that public service content isn't swallowed up by the incentives of big vertically integrated companies to push their own content forward and that ours gets lost.
Okay, I'm going to move on if that's okay. To question 4. Just down here at the front. Okay.
Hi, I'm Erica Darby from Eagle vs. Bat and Spider Eye. What are broadcasters doing to ensure the greatest degree of diversity?
Alice, you've been through some interesting episodes on this. What's your thinking on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think diversity is so important to us at the BBC, as it is to, I know, to everybody here in these rooms. And it's something I'm incredibly proud of about our output and our work that we do at the BBC. Across all our shows, I would urge everyone to watch our shows and to see just how really diverse they are. And those of you who work with us know how important it is to us, and whether that is from our preschool shows like Apple Tree House or Pablo or The Dumping Ground on CBBC or Joe All Alone. Diversity in all its forms, incredibly important to us on and off screen. That is not to say that we don't always get it right, and Stuart's referring particularly to an incident which I'm sure you've all heard about, Living with the Lambs. So let's explore that as a scenario. A show that we commissioned that had British East Asian, so we're really excited about being able to bring some new portrayal to screen, British East Asian family drama, and including involvement from British East Asians, but other parts of the community felt that we hadn't represented them as authentically as they would want. So we are big enough, we are open enough to say, okay, there's more we need to do on that. That show in particular has gone back into development. It has a new showrunner who is British East Asian on it, and it is now back in development. So that's a very particular example, and I raised that one because that was high profile, but that's to give you a sense of how committed we are to keep going until we get it right. So across the board, really important, but where we've got more to do, we are very happy to get on and do that.
So one of the groups that picked this up was something that calls itself BEATS, that's British East Asians Working in Theatre and Screen. We should be clarified that this programme has not been transmitted, but they somehow received a script or scripts which were written by what they call a white writer. And the point they throw up, they obviously were unhappy with what they saw as some of the way that this Chinese family running a restaurant were depicted in this script. But I think the wider point they say, we ask broadcasters to stop colonising our narratives. I think they take from that why did you not immediately think of having a writer with Chinese heritage or East Asian heritage to do this? Why did it kind of need this row for you to in a sense, embrace this more?
Yeah, and
I'll ask you, and then perhaps ITV and Channel 4 want to comment. Is this a colonisation of their narratives? And we saw this sort of phrase about taking people's cultures and I suppose in a sense whitening them.
Sure.
Is that what's behind this?
No, of course not. In terms of, and as I said, there were people from British East Asian community were involved, cast, people had been talked with about this, but how people see their identity is different. There were lots of different people have their own view of their own identities. There was more we could do. We welcomed that dialogue, and we are doing that. And as I say, the show is back in development, and it will now have its own life, and it will go on to become, the next version.
Sophie and then Magnus, if you had an equivalent programme, would you think it was appropriate to have a, quote, white writer writing about people from different diverse communities?
Well, I'm not familiar enough with the particular case, but I think it opens a question about the importance of having a diversity of people working in the industry. Now, sometimes that's in the case of experts who can come and consult and give advice on individual programmes, and I don't think that inherently someone is disqualified from writing a great piece of content if they've got a great idea, but sometimes you bring in experts. But actually, I think it gets to a question which is really about how we ensure that off-screen we have a diverse range enough of people making programmes, coming to us with ideas, and that's right across a kind of whole plethora of different groups. So one of the things that we are trying to achieve in our move to lead and opening our hubs in Bristol and Glasgow is opening Channel 4 up to parts of the country we've never been in before, because we think that creatively there will be a benefit in doing that by having more diverse people from different socioeconomic groups, different parts of the country, that will add to the richness of what ultimately gets on screen. Okay. Clearly, if you have a homogenous group of sort of similarly minded people sitting in one office in London, you just don't have the breadth and richness of ideas.
Magnus, you've got a big Sunday night drama about India, which is written and produced, I think, by somebody with that heritage. Is that a factor in commissioning, do you think?
Well, I think the same point Sophie made, really, which is that systematically what we're trying to do on and off screen is make sure that we're reflecting the diversity of Britain, because we can't stand up and say we're a PSB that's broadcasting to the whole nation and including everybody if in fact we're not doing that. So we systematically look to make sure on our talent shows, in our dramas, on screen, that we're as diverse as we can and should be. But similarly, behind the screen, in our recruitment, in things like our sponsorship of Creative Access, which is a sort of grassroots scheme trying to get more BAME and people from disadvantaged backgrounds into TV. It's actually based in the ITV building. We've had a couple of hundred people now going out into the industry, and we're using all of our contacts to try and get people way into the industry, which is often quite difficult. So I think systematically what we're trying to do is to reflect modern Britain. And actually regionally, I think we've always been very good. I mean, the interesting thing is that, regionally, Britain is less diverse than London, weirdly. So you have this sort of slightly strange thing where if you increase out of London, you actually it can be slightly harder actually, and you have to work harder than in London. But
okay, just when I do my kind of Amazon, if you like this, you will love this slot, which is that in the sessions coming up, there's one about change makers, there's one about unconscious bias. There's one about the C word, which is looking at class, which is all about social mobility, which is another big theme in diversity at the moment. Of the issues we've discussed so far on the streamers, the SVODs, there's a session which I think is coming up straight away after our stream if you want to go faster. And there's also VOD commissioners are here for you to have conversations with. And back on our first thing about the Audience Content Fund, that I would really recommend a user's guide, a session this afternoon about the Young Audience Content Fund. And I should say on the subject of diversity that if you're thinking of applying for that fund, you have to meet certain BFI diversity standards. Let us now move on very much to the online world and to question 5. Thank you.
John Kent, I'm Children's Media Foundation. Will the government white paper on internet safety give the UK the most radical regulation in the world, or will it be ineffective?
Thank you, John. That's the white paper on online harms, or how to prevent online harms. Kevin, putting you in a slightly difficult slot because Ofcom did a lot of preparatory work in preparing a paper which I'm sure the government took into account when they came up. Ofcom's been mentioned as a potential regulator in this area, but that decision hasn't been made. But Sharon White, only a couple of days ago, outgoing chief executive of Ofcom, was talking about some of the issues arising. So what's your response to John? Is it the most radical control in the world? That's where it's been depicted, or most strongest action a government has ever taken on this area. But will it be ineffective?
Yes, you're right. So we Ofcom are doing a lot of work and thinking about this for the last kind of couple of years, actually, which also has involved talking to some of the big online players as well. And clearly, we also talk to our international counterparts. And, as everyone knows, online regulation is something that's being thought about around the world. So, I think the straightforward answer is I think if the government white paper, as it currently stands, was implemented, it would definitely be the widest regime that the world has seen. I think it presents some issues in practical terms about whether that is actually possible to implement or not. I think the view from Ofcom, certainly on content, harmful content online, is you need to actually target the most harmful content and do it in a proportionate way, and a way that particularly still allows freedom of expression, and particularly in the freedom of innovation online. And getting that balance right that is tough. And I think, whoever the regulator ends up being, and that's a choice for the government, clearly, I think that's going to be at the heart of it, which is actually which harms you actually aim to target, how much responsibility you put back on the tech firms, how much transparency you can drive. And I think that means whoever the regulator is, they need statutory powers. They need to be able to go in there with information requests. They need to be able to actually see what's going on. But they need to turn about the responsibility on the tech companies, because they're the only people who've got the money and the numbers of people to be able to deliver some of this stuff. But we need to know what they're doing properly. So it's a long-winded way of saying, frankly, I think that this is going to be, for the new Prime Minister and the new Secretary of State, or the existing Secretary of State, if he stays in the job, this will be a question for them about actually how they take that white paper and transfer it into something that is possible to implement. And frankly, does Parliament have the headspace and the time to legislate on this? Because it won't work without legislation. And, clearly finding the time for that at the moment is problematic.
Okay, that's really helpful. Perhaps the microphone could go back to John Kent. I'll come back to you in a second, John, to follow up on this. I don't know who else would like to come in. I mean, John, you're used to dealing with some big American organisations in right terms than others. Do you think a British-based regulator is going to make much progress trying to hold Facebook, Google, YouTube to account?
Well, we've tried before on various other points, copyright abuse and piracy and various other things. I sort of agree with Kevin. I think where we've got to this is we know what the problems are. There are some attempts to find solutions, but it's way beyond just harmful content. There's a whole range of other issues, as we've seen, about elections and various other things happening, which means that we, governments and society, have to try and not just the UK society, but more widely, need to try and find ways to work out how we navigate a global system. Having little pockets of different legislation, I don't think, which may not join up, I don't think is actually where we'll end up in the longer term. I mean, I think the debate is right, but I'm not convinced that the solutions are actually going to be that effective, and particularly if the enforcement regimes aren't actually enforcement regimes. There'll be a workaround. There'll be another way to do it. So I remain happy we're having the debate, sceptical about the solutions.
So we just get a quick response from John, because I know you've done work on this, particularly for CMF. I mean, do you agree, I suppose, would I characterise you as slightly sceptical, John, on that front, about its effectiveness?
Yeah.
What do you think, John?
I'm slightly sceptical about it. I think it's a good move. I think it's a positive move. But I think the way it's framed, it's not going to be able to keep up with the tech companies.
Yeah.
Do you want to come in, Alice?
Yeah,
Yes.
just to add to that, though, and putting it in context of children, because obviously that's an online harms paper for everybody, and then bringing that back to children, I do think it is to be welcomed. I share the concerns about the actual ability to implement it, but I think it's incredibly important we don't use that as an excuse not to keep pushing on, not to keep shouting about this. I think we all have a responsibility. We just talked at the top of this panel about how kids are online and consuming online. We all, and I kind of include you in all of this as well, have a responsibility, therefore, with what we are doing to make sure that we are putting things out in a responsible way, that we are helping children. That's part of public service, is to do that in digital spaces, as we have been, happy to do in the physical world for years and years and years. So I think it's a helpful thing. I think we should be pushing digital players to go much further, but I think we should be doing ours as we are. And a massive plug now, you can go and download BBC Own It in the Google Play Store, which is just out in beta, which is part of the answer from us there. So please go do that.
John, did you want to come back or something?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with Alice, but I mean, I think it's striking that because of the state of our politics and everything else, that this is actually one of the biggest issues as a society that we face, not just for children, but for all of us, fraud and all the other harmful things. And political parties, I just think, are off the curve on this. There needs to be a more lively debate from across our politicians about what this means for us going forward. It's not just about little things that look good in the Daily Mail. It's a broader issue for all of us, and it goes to the prominence issues and all the other things. The impact of all this, I just think, is missing from the wider political debate.
Anne, you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think if there was one thing we could push for as an industry is that the way in which content is just delivered to kids without any respect to who they are, what age they are, what is appropriate, is completely wrong. And the tech companies say that they have no ability to know whether it's a child online or an adult. Well, considering those tech companies continually send me ads that are the exact same pair of shoes that I was looking at 3 days previously, why can't they tell its kids? I'm sure they can. They just don't want to.
Stuart, can I?
Yes, can.
Yeah, I mean, I just would, I would like to come back to. I don't think this is an impossibility to do.
Well, a lot of it, seems to me, does rely on what you might call the common sense of the regulator. I mean, it's giving the regulator a hell of a lot of discretion if this is going to work.
It does.
And therefore, many people would hope it was Ofcom, many people hope it wasn't Ofcom.
Well, I'm sure that's true.
Yeah.
Maybe we'd hope it wasn't us as well. But, but I do think that, people have got to be realistic. You can't tackle everything. But I know from the work we've done and the thinking we've tried to input, it is possible to tackle the worst online harms. And frankly, if you can tackle the very worst, you're doing, there's a lot you could do for society as a regulator, because we know the damage that's been done out there. And I do think it's doable, and it's doable within one nation state. We've seen some countries around Europe do their own things. They're not all perfect, but they have taken action. It has had an impact on the tech companies. It's not impossible, but it requires Parliament to legislate for it.
Okay, I'm going to have to move on to question 6. And after question 6, there will be a few minutes for questions which you suddenly thought of and wanted to follow up on, or have new areas we haven't discussed. But let's take question 6 first.
Hi, I'm Hedda Brusing from Dutch public broadcaster NTR, and my question is, what is the future of co-production in a post-Brexit world?
If we ever arrive at a post-Brexit, well, I suppose you should be the rider to that. John, you've talked to government a lot about these matters. What's your view?
Yeah, well, I mean, literally the day after the referendum, I had to prepare a paper for Pact Council about all this, which is my board of directors of British producers. Actually, I think co-production is fine. Brexit doesn't actually, if we're in Europe or out of Europe, we have co-production treaties. We're part of the Transfrontier Television Agreement. The UK has entered into lots of co-production treaties. I've been party to many of them, China and Brazil. We can sign co-production treaties with any other sovereign nation, whether we're part of the EU or not. And I think co-production will continue to thrive. In fact, we've seen, certainly from our numbers, we've seen no reduction in co-production since the referendum. And the UK, as one of the most important audiovisual markets outside of America, will continue to be a very attractive partner for people from around Europe and the rest of the world. Because of the quality of the producers here and the markets that we can access. So I remain pretty confident that whatever and whenever we find a solution to all this, that co-production will continue to thrive.
There are other issues, John, that you and others colleagues have been talking to government about in a post-Brexit world. Are there any of them which really, really worry you? I mean, I suppose the one was about, co-production involves taking foreigners' money, but we actually like taking foreigners to work for us. And some people have wondered whether that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, talent. I mean, a lot of talent, because the UK has been such a fast-growing audiovisual economy, a lot of talent wants to work here, and that's been great for us, and it's a good thing. Again, we don't really know where we're going to net out on migration. There's been a whole range of views from government. We've now got 2 people looking to be the next Prime Minister who have different views and different systems they might look at. But at the end of the day, we want to remain a thriving culture that attracts the best people from around the world to work in our industry. That's a good thing for us. And we've made the case to government, and I know many other people in this room will have made the case to government as well, that that's a good thing, and we should continue to try and find a way to make sure that happens without a huge burden on the business.
And from a producer's point of view, do you think producers are able to? I mean, obviously, if they're members of PACT, they'll get some briefing updates and everything. But I mean, if you're say an animation producer, do you have it? Do you know what's going on? I suppose I'll put it. I mean, do you feel that people are up to speed with what might happen?
I'm not sure anyone is, including all the people competing to be Conservative leader. But I think from a producer's point of view, there are certainly a number of things that really concern us in a post-Brexit world. Access to the European Media Fund, which a lot of producers use, and free movement of talent that John touched on. I mean, I think particularly in the animation industry, but in live action as well, that is of massive importance. Those industries just cannot continue without an influx of fresh talent that comes from Europe. That's and elsewhere in the world. That's just how we work now. So if that were to change, we would be facing crisis.
Okay, well, lots of opportunities to follow up on that. The Animation Skills Fund, there's a session tomorrow afternoon called Use It or Lose It. If you want to do business in China, there's a session on that tomorrow morning. And Focus on Ireland, I can't believe they're going to spend all the time talking about the backstop there. I'm sure there'll be matters of other more interest. And just to pick up again on online harms, Resetting the Moral Compass this afternoon, Gambling and Gaming also this afternoon, and there are various research sessions going on the whole time of relevance. We've got a few minutes for unscripted, should we say, or unprepared questions. Can I just see any hands for people? Is there one there, please? Yes, go ahead. If you could say who you are and where you're from.
Hi, my name is Karen Lawler. I'm from Hachette Children's Group, the publisher. I was wondering if you all saw the Changemaker speech yesterday and if you had any particular ideas about how you could take in some of her comments around how we as an industry can be more responsible, especially around climate change.
Not sure how many people came up last night as opposed to saw the session yesterday. And did you see?
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
So, yeah, I thought, wow, she was amazing, wasn't she, in terms of the impact for all of us, and a really good rallying cry. I don't have anything specifically new for that we are thinking in the last 12 hours that we're going to start doing as a result of that. But I can tell you that we know that this is the highest priority for our audience in terms of things that they worry about. And that means we worry about it too. We are already doing huge amounts of content that's got climate impact on our world involved in that. I'm sure many of you have filled out our Albert calculator, our carbon calculator. We are absolutely debating in BBC Children's whether we can reduce all our travel. We are a very international industry. We travel around the place. I've already started looking at trains to MIP. I kid you not, but genuinely, in order to be able to do that. So no, but she landed her point, and we'll take that back, and we'll look at what we do with that.
Good. Other questions? John down. Thank you.
Hi, it's not so much a question. Kate O'Connor, Animation UK. It's just to pick up the baton, because obviously Animation UK, 2 years old, representing the brilliant, iconic, technically skilled, geographically dispersed animation industry in the UK, and we are tackling all of the issues you mentioned, particularly around talent and skills and funding and investment and advocacy. But I do just want to say, rather than ask the question, I do hope animation is featuring heavily in the plans for additional investment for UK originated content and the Young Audience Content Fund, and not just pigeonholed for preschool and the younger audience, because there's a real role for our animation sector to develop brilliant new original content for an older age group.
Does what lie behind that question a feeling that they may be being overlooked or left out?
I think there was initial feel that some of the focus was on factual, rightly there's a gap, and older audiences, rightly there's a gap, and live action. And I think there are very particular longer term issues that need to be addressed with animation that makes our conversation, which we'll be having directly with the broadcasters, so essential.
Okay. Other questions? Right. Oh yes, was one down here, just behind you. Thanks.
Morning. Michael Shields from Akamar Films. It seems that ideological discussions have sort of gone out of fashion. And the whole panel is talking very eloquently about a post-PSB world, particularly in relation to ITV. It was only in 2008 when Michael Grade, having brought back News at 10, did not want to be the person who presided over the loss of PSB obligations on ITV. And right now our system is hugely weighted towards the BBC, which does a magnificent job and does not have competition, because there is not an ideological discussion about providing real resources, real money, into the wider system to create healthy competition across the board. Have we just given up that ideological thinking? Because now we've got a much more efficient market from America decimating the ability of our public service broadcasters to thrive. And I'm not hearing any of that discussion at all.
Okay, well, I think Kevin should respond to, have we been talking about a post-PSB world?
No.
Sure we were.
No, I mean, we're not talking about post-PSB. What we're talking about is how PSBs can thrive in the new world, which is very different from a post-PSB world.
The government let them off the hook in terms of spend. They make £880 million a year profit, ITV, on a 3.2 billion turnover. How much do they spend on children's programmes? What's the number?
Well, ITV can speak for themselves on that because they're here, but I know that the PSB commitments that Channel 4, ITV and Channel 5 have, who are not here, have a price tag attached to them, and it's a significant price tag, and it's not just children's, it's news, it's regional news, it's other genres that they have to deliver. You know, I
understand that. I just it feels like the debate about the ITV in particular, I'm not picking on ITV, but the whole PSB system, with an obligation to children, that the debate is over, we've lost the argument, there's no point in resuscitating it. John, I don't know, do you want to speak?
Well, no, I think I must, sorry, John, I must give Magnus
sorry.
a chance to respond.
So, I mean,
very quickly, because we're running out of time.
You'll be slightly surprised to hear that I sort of partially agree with you, actually, in a way. I think exactly what we have to have now is a significant debate about what the future of PSB is. ITV absolutely wants to remain a PSB at the heart of national life. We want to carry on with effective news services. We've got to find a way of paying for it in a world where we've got increasing advertising competition, increasing competition for investment and audience. That's the challenge, and it's really a question of, is government up for the challenge of intervention around prominence, around our relationship with platforms, around a number of other things which help support the PSB ecology. And that's the exam question. Can you preserve a national system alongside a system of global broadcasting? And I sincerely hope you can, and we're very committed to trying to do that.
Well, that's great. You make $1.5 billion from ITV Studios, you make $1.5 billion from advertising, you make $880 million adjusted EBITDA profit. How much do you spend on children's?
But that number isn't in the public domain, and I'm not about to say it here. We've increased the budget.
I don't know why
we've
not.
increased the budget by 10% this year. And by the way, I mean, in a sense, the global profit number, quite a lot of that is actually production, or it's a global distribution. It's not actually the broadcasting.
It's still working capital available to invest in this industry. Sorry,
well,
I realise I'm going on.
I'd go on all day, but I mean, the fact is we have run out of time. Now, this is the moment we come to the end of the session, and I've been asked to caution you against any stage invasions. That's the process by which you come up and lobby for commissions. We might make an exception for you if you want to continue with Magnus. Yeah, exactly, absolutely. But listen, look, they'll be around for a bit, an opportunity to talk to them outside. So that's the end of this session. We need to clear the room, but will you please say thank you so much to our panel.